Emily sat in the sterile white office, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as the doctor delivered the news. The words felt distant, like an echo traveling through a tunnel. Cancer, chemotherapy, treatment plan, survival rate. She nodded along, pretending to absorb it all, but in reality, her mind was spiraling. The thought of her body betraying her like this was almost too much to bear. When the doctor finally paused, waiting for her to respond, she swallowed hard and forced herself to speak. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor explained the schedule. An aggressive course of chemotherapy starting in 2 weeks. There would be side effects, nausea, exhaustion, hair loss. But they were hopeful. The cancer was treatable, and if she followed the plan, she had a good chance. Emily nodded again and thanked the doctor before stepping out into the hallway. The moment the door closed behind her, she leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. This wasn't just a bad dream. This was real, and she would have to fight. On the drive home, she thought about how she would break the news to Ryan. They had been married for 3 years, and while their marriage had its ups and downs, she had always believed they were a team. He would be devastated, of course, but she knew he would be there for her. He had to be. That's what marriage was about. Supporting each other in sickness and in health. When she finally pulled into their driveway, she took a deep breath and walked inside. Ryan was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. "Hey," she said softly, sitting beside him. He looked up, noticing the tension in her face. "What's wrong?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then forced herself to say the words. "I have cancer." Ryan's face went pale. He blinked as if trying to process the information. "What? Are you sure?" She nodded. "I just came from the doctor. It's early stage, but I need to start chemo in 2 weeks." For a moment, Ryan didn't say anything. Then he let out a breath and ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus, Em." She reached for his hand. "I need you to be with me through this, okay? It's gonna be tough, but I know I can get through it if you're by my side." Ryan squeezed her hand, his grip reassuring. "Of course, I'll be here for you no matter what." Relief washed over her, but it didn't last long. The next evening, Margaret showed up unannounced, as she often did. Emily had never been particularly close with her mother-in-law. Margaret was the kind of woman who demanded attention and expected the world to cater to her. She had never fully approved of Emily, always making passive-aggressive comments about how Ryan could have married someone who took better care of herself, or how Emily was lucky he settled down so soon, but Emily had always tried to keep the peace. Margaret walked into the house with her usual air of entitlement, barely acknowledging Emily before turning to Ryan. "So, are you packed yet? We leave in 2 weeks." Emily frowned. "Packed? For what?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably, but it was Margaret who answered. "Oh, sweetie, Ryan didn't tell you? We're going to Europe for 3 weeks. A mother-son trip. We've been planning it for months." Emily felt her stomach drop. "Ryan, is this true?" Ryan hesitated. "Yeah, but it was before we knew about everything. I just forgot to mention it." Margaret scoffed. "And why should that change anything? This trip has been in the works for ages. It's non-refundable." Emily stared at her in disbelief. "I have chemotherapy starting in 2 weeks. I need Ryan here." Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be dramatic. You'll have doctors, nurses, and your own family. Ryan deserves a break, especially now. Do you really want to burden him with all of that?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Burden him?" Margaret sighed, as if she were the one dealing with something exhausting. "Look, cancer is tough, I get it. But life goes on. Ryan shouldn't have to put his entire life on hold just because you're sick. He needs this trip. He works so hard, and this is his chance to relax." Emily turned to Ryan, expecting him to defend her. Expecting him to stand up and say, "Of course I'm staying. My wife needs me." But he looked torn, conflicted, and that hesitation alone was a betrayal. "Ryan," she said, her voice shaking. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know, Em. It's a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and Mom already paid for everything. Maybe..." We could figure something out. Maybe your sister could stay with you during treatments? Emily felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. She was about to go through one of the hardest battles of her life, and the man who had vowed to stand by her was considering leaving her behind. Margaret patted Ryan's arm. See, he's being reasonable. Besides, stress is bad for cancer patients. You need to focus on yourself, not worrying about what Ryan is doing. Emily clenched her jaw. So, let me get this straight. While I'm hooked up to an IV, sick and exhausted, you want Ryan to be off in Europe drinking wine and sightseeing. Margaret shrugged. It's not a crime to enjoy life, dear. And honestly, you're acting a little selfish. Selfish. That word rang in Emily's ears, and something inside her shifted. This wasn't just insensitivity. This was cruelty. Margaret had always been manipulative, but this was another level. And Ryan, her husband, was falling right into it. For the first time in their marriage, Emily felt something break. A deep, unshakable realization settled in. She was alone in this. Margaret was still talking, going on about hotel reservations and flights, but Emily wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at Ryan, memorizing the look on his face, the indecision, the weakness, the betrayal. She took a slow, steady breath. Fine, she said finally, standing up. Go on your trip. Do whatever you want. Margaret smirked, clearly satisfied with her victory. See, now that's the mature attitude. Emily didn't respond. She simply turned and walked upstairs, feeling the anger build inside her. Not just anger, something colder, sharper. Margaret had planned her vacation. Emily would plan something too, but it wouldn't be a trip. It would be something Margaret would never see coming. Emily sat in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The darkness in the room felt suffocating, pressing down on her like a heavy weight. She could hear Ryan breathing beside her, sound asleep, as if nothing had changed. As if he hadn't just chosen a European vacation over standing by his wife during chemotherapy. Her mind raced. The betrayal wasn't just painful, it was clarifying. It stripped away any illusions she had about her marriage, about Ryan, about the people she had trusted. She had spent years trying to make things work with his mother, brushing off insults, keeping the peace for the sake of her husband. And for what? So that when she needed him most, he could abandon her without a second thought? She turned onto her side, staring at Ryan's sleeping face. There was no guilt in his expression, no restlessness. He had made his choice, and now Emily had to make hers. She wasn't going to beg him to stay. She wasn't going to plead for support. If they wanted to act like she didn't matter, she would show them exactly how wrong they were. The gathering storm. The next morning, Emily got out of bed early, moving carefully so as not to wake Ryan. She made herself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out her phone. The first person she called was her sister, Claire. Hey, Em, how are you feeling? Claire's voice was warm, concerned. She was the kind of sister who always showed up no matter what. Emily hesitated, then exhaled. Not great. Can I tell you something? Of course. She explained everything, her diagnosis, the treatment plan, and then, finally, what Margaret had done. When she got to the part about Ryan actually considering leaving, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Are you kidding me? Claire finally said, her voice sharp with anger. I wish I was. He's actually planning to go on this trip while you're in chemo? Yeah, Emily whispered. There was another pause, and then Claire's voice hardened. All right, that's it. I'm coming over. You don't have to. I do have to. You need a plan, Em. You can't just sit there and let them treat you like this. You deserve better. Emily bit her lip. She had spent all night thinking the same thing, but hearing Claire say it out loud made it real. Okay, she said, come over. An hour later, Claire arrived with coffee and a notepad. She sat across from Emily, flipping it open. All right, she said. Step 1. We make sure you're not alone in this. Step 2. We expose Margaret for the selfish monster she is. Step 3. We make sure Ryan feels the weight of what he's done. Emily blinked. You wrote steps? Damn right I did. For the first time in 24 hours, Emily felt a flicker of something that wasn't exhaustion or despair. It was small, but it was there. Hope. Building the case. Claire's first suggestion was to document everything. Margaret thrives on playing the victim, Claire said. You need proof of what she's done so that when the time comes, she can't twist the story. Emily scrolled through her phone, pulling up text messages, voice memos, anything that showed Margaret's manipulation. Claire took screenshots, saving everything into a neatly organized folder. Then, Emily remembered something else. Margaret's past behavior. The times she had guilt-tripped Ryan into prioritizing her over his own wife. The times she had spread rumors about Emily to other family members. It wasn't just this one incident. Margaret had been eroding Emily's place in Ryan's life for years. Claire nodded. Perfect. We build a timeline, a pattern. We make it impossible for anyone to excuse what she's done. It was tedious work, but it felt good, like reclaiming some control. And as they worked, Emily's anger didn't just simmer, it sharpened into resolve. A test of loyalty. By that evening, Claire had left, but Emily had a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just going to sit back and accept this betrayal. She needed to know just how deep Ryan's loyalty to his mother ran. So she decided to test him. That night, as they sat on the couch, she said, "Ryan, can we talk?" He looked up from his phone, cautious. "Yeah?" Emily took a deep breath. "I need to know. If I asked you not to go on this trip, would you stay?" Ryan frowned. "Em, we've talked about this. My mom—" "I'm not asking about your mom," she interrupted. "I'm asking about you. If I told you I need you here with me, would you choose me?" Ryan hesitated. It was only a second, but it was a second too long. "Em, I don't think it's fair to put me in that position," he said carefully. "I mean, it's not like me going away hurts you." Emily felt something inside her go cold. "It does hurt me," she said quietly. "Do you even realize how much?" Ryan sighed. "It's just 3 weeks. When I get back, I'll be here for the rest of your treatments." Emily stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. "So that's your answer?" He rubbed his temples. "I just don't think it's that big of a deal, Em. You're making it sound like I'm abandoning you, but you'll have people around. Claire, your parents. It's not like you're alone." That was it. That was all she needed to hear. Ryan wasn't just spineless. He wasn't just easily manipulated. He didn't love her enough to put her first. And that realization hurt more than anything Margaret had ever done. The beginning of the end. That night, as Ryan slept beside her, Emily made her decision. She wouldn't stop him from going on the trip. She wouldn't fight for a man who didn't fight for her. Instead, she would focus on herself. The next morning, she made 2 phone calls. The first was to her lawyer. "I need to discuss my options," she said. The second was to Margaret. "Margaret," she said, her voice calm. "I just wanted to say thank you." Margaret paused. "For what?" "For showing me exactly where I stand in this family." Then she hung up. Margaret thought she had won, but the game had just begun. Emily sat in the quiet of her bedroom, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. But this wasn't the crushing weight of despair she had felt before. This was something different, something steadier, a sense of control. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was no longer drowning. She was standing on solid ground, ready to face whatever came next. She had spent the past few days carefully setting her plan into motion. She hadn't tried to stop Ryan from packing his bags. She hadn't argued when he told her that he and his mother were finalizing their itinerary. Instead, she had smiled, nodded, and played the part of the understanding wife. She let Margaret believe she had won, let Ryan believe he was getting away with it. And all the while, she had been preparing. The exposure. The night before Ryan and Margaret were set to leave, Emily sent out a carefully crafted email to the entire family. Ryan's extended relatives, close friends, even a few of Margaret's social acquaintances. The subject line was simple: "What family means to me." She kept the tone measured, factual. There was no bitterness, no dramatics. just the truth. Dear family and friends, she began. I wanted to take a moment to share something personal. As many of you know, I was recently diagnosed with cancer. It has been an incredibly difficult time, but I have been grateful for the love and support I've received from my side of the family, my close friends, and my wonderful sister, Claire. Unfortunately, not everyone has been as supportive. She laid out the facts with precision. How Margaret had planned her trip without a second thought. How Ryan, instead of staying to care for his wife during chemotherapy, had chosen to go with her. She attached screenshots of Margaret's dismissive text messages, proving exactly how little she cared about Emily's well-being. She described in clinical detail the way Ryan had justified his decision, his hesitations, his excuses, the way he had called her selfish for wanting her husband by her side. I do not share this for sympathy, she concluded. I share it because I believe in honesty, because family, to me, means standing by the people you love when they need you most, and I want to be surrounded by people who understand that. She clicked send, and then she waited. The fallout begins. Margaret's phone must have exploded within minutes. Emily was downstairs making tea when she heard Ryan's voice from the other room. What the hell is this? She didn't even turn around. What's what? This email. Emily, what the hell were you thinking? My phone is blowing up. She took a slow sip of her tea before finally turning to face him. He was standing in the living room, his face red with anger, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. I was thinking, she said calmly, that the people in our lives deserve to know the truth. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like he was struggling to form a coherent argument. My aunt just called me and said she can't believe I'm actually leaving you alone during chemo. Emily tilted her head. What did you tell her? Ryan hesitated. I told her it's not that simple. That you were fine with it. I never said I was fine with it. Emily, you didn't stop me. She gave him a small, humorless smile. No, I didn't. I wanted to see if you'd make the right decision on your own. He groaned, running a hand through his hair. You made me look like a monster. You made yourself look like a monster, she corrected. I just let people see it. Before Ryan could respond, his phone started buzzing again. Margaret. Emily watched as he hesitated before answering. Mom, Ryan, fix this. Now! Margaret's voice was shrill enough that Emily could hear it even from across the room. Mom, I don't know what to say. Everyone's freaking out. Aunt Linda said she's disgusted. Uncle Greg said Dad would be ashamed of me. Margaret cut him off. I told you she was manipulative. She's turning everyone against us. You need to get her to take it back. Ryan looked at Emily desperately. Emily, please, can't you just... No, she said, cutting him off. I can't. Margaret must have heard that because she started screaming through the phone. You ungrateful little... Emily turned on her heel and walked upstairs, leaving Ryan alone with his mess. The breaking point. Ryan didn't leave that night. Emily had expected him to pack up his bags and storm out, but instead he stayed up late pacing the house, making frantic phone calls. She heard him trying to justify himself, trying to explain, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. But the damage was done. The next morning, she came downstairs to find Ryan sitting on the couch, looking exhausted. He stared at her like he barely recognized her. You really hate my mom, don't you? He said finally. Emily sighed. This isn't about your mom, Ryan. It's about you. You could have made a choice. You could have stood up for me, but you didn't. His jaw tightened. And what about you? You humiliated me in front of my entire family. She met his gaze, unflinching. I told the truth. If that humiliated you, maybe you should ask yourself why. Ryan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. So what now? You just want me to cancel the trip and act like nothing happened? She shook her head. No, Ryan, I don't want you to cancel the trip. He frowned. You don't? No, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Because I don't want you here anymore. The words landed like a slap. Ryan blinked. Wait, what? I talked to a lawyer yesterday, she continued, her tone steady. I'm starting the process of separating. His face went pale. Emily, you can't be serious. I am serious, she interrupted. I needed to see where your priorities were, and you made them very clear." Ryan looked like he wanted to argue, but for once he had no defense. Emily took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "You and your mother planned a vacation while I was fighting for my life? That told me everything I needed to know about this marriage." She turned toward the kitchen, grabbing her tea from the counter. Behind her, she could hear Ryan breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. "You should probably go finish packing," she added. "Wouldn't want you to miss your flight." Ryan didn't move, didn't speak. For the first time, it was him who had been left behind. Emily sat in her living room, the silence hanging heavy in the air, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. She hadn't realized how much peace could come from the absence of Ryan's presence. How much weight could be lifted from her shoulders when she no longer had to tiptoe around his choices and Margaret's demands. The house felt emptier, yes, but also more hers than it had in years. Shit. The morning after Ryan had left, he called her. She didn't pick up. The next day he called again. She let it ring out. And the day after that, there was another message. She didn't listen to it. She knew what it would be. A string of apologies, excuses, and pleas for forgiveness. But nothing he said could change the fact that, in her most vulnerable moment, he had chosen his mother over her. Emily wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, expecting another message from Ryan, but it wasn't from him. It was from Claire. "Can I come over?" the text read. Without hesitation, Emily replied, "Yes, please." Within 20 minutes, her sister was at the door, a familiar, comforting presence that seemed to fill the space with warmth. Claire didn't waste any time. She walked straight over to the couch where Emily was sitting and sat down beside her. "You're doing okay, right?" Claire asked gently, her eyes soft but sharp with concern. Emily smiled, a little sadly. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good," Claire said, her voice resolute. "Because you made the right choice. You know that, right?" Emily nodded, though the ache in her chest hadn't fully dissipated. "I do. It just hurts more than I expected." Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "I know. It will. But you'll heal. And you'll do it without him." That was something Emily hadn't fully come to terms with yet. The finality of it. The realization that her life had just been irrevocably changed by one betrayal. But that also meant she was free from all the manipulation, the expectations, the second-guessing. She could move forward. And that was what scared her. "Are you ready for the next step?" Claire asked, her voice full of quiet determination. Emily hesitated. "I'm not sure." "Well," Claire said, standing up and walking over to the kitchen counter, "you don't have to do anything right now, but you need to think about what's next for you. And I think you should go to the doctor today." Emily's eyes widened. "The doctor? Why?" Claire turned back, her face serious. "For you, for your health. You've been putting yourself last for so long, for him, for them. But this is about you now. You've got a battle ahead of you, and you need to make sure you're ready for it." The words hit Emily hard. Claire was right. She had been so focused on everything outside of herself, the cancer, the marriage, the expectations, that she hadn't fully realized how little she had been taking care of herself. Now, with everything that had happened, it was time to prioritize her health, her happiness, her future. "I'll go," Emily said softly. "I'll go today." Claire smiled. "Good, and when you're ready, I'm going to help you get back to being you. The real you, the strong, unstoppable you." The words felt like a balm on Emily's wounded heart. The world had felt so dark and uncertain in the past few days, but Claire's unwavering belief in her gave Emily a glimpse of light. By the time she made her appointment, Emily knew what she had to do. She had to take the reins of her life again. She couldn't keep living for anyone else, especially not Ryan or Margaret. She had to focus on herself. A new beginning. The following days passed in a blur of appointments and decisions. Emily went to the doctor, had a long conversation about her treatment plan, and began making arrangements for the chemotherapy that would start soon. She found herself talking more with her friends, her family, leaning on them in ways she hadn't allowed herself to before. Claire was a constant source of support, making sure Emily was never alone, and that every choice she made was in her best interest. One afternoon, when Emily was sitting on her porch, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Ryan. "Can we talk?" Emily stared at the message for a long time before deciding to reply. She was ready. "Okay," she typed, "but only if you come to me." The doorbell rang about an hour later. Ryan stood there, looking like a man who had been through hell. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his posture slumped with the weight of guilt. "Hi," he said almost sheepishly. "I've been thinking about everything you said, about the email, and about what I did." Emily nodded, inviting him inside, though she knew there was no going back from this, no fixing the hurt he had caused her. But she wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the selfishness, tired of trying to make someone else see her worth. Ryan sat down across from her, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Em. I know I hurt you, and I didn't realize how much until I was already on that plane. You're right. My priorities were completely messed up." Emily stayed quiet, letting him speak. There was a time when she would have tried to console him, reassure him, make him feel better. But now, she realized that the only person she needed to take care of was herself. "Why are you here, Ryan?" she asked softly. He swallowed hard. "I want to make things right. I want to fix it." She shook her head slowly. "You can't fix this, Ryan. You made your choice. And I have to live with that." "I know," he whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me, not right away at least. But I need you to know that I'm sorry." Emily looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel anything for him. No love, no anger, just a quiet resignation. "You broke my trust," she said, her voice steady. "And honestly, I don't think I can ever get it back. You weren't there for me when I needed you, and now I need to focus on getting better. I can't do that while holding on to the past." Ryan's eyes filled with tears. "Emily, I love you. I know I messed up, but please, don't give up on me. Don't give up on us." For a moment, Emily just stared at him, feeling the full weight of everything he had put her through. She had loved him once. She had loved him fiercely. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. "I'm not giving up on me," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "and I'm not going to let you be my excuse to keep hurting." Ryan stood up, his face crumpling in defeat. "I understand." And with that, he turned and walked out of the door, leaving her alone once again. Moving on. Over the next few weeks, Emily focused on herself. The chemotherapy began, and while the side effects were brutal, she felt stronger than ever. She reached out to her family, her friends, and her sister, letting them know she was ready to fight. Not just the cancer, but the life she had been holding on to for far too long. Ryan didn't call again. Margaret didn't try to reach out either, and Emily didn't care. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. She wasn't waiting for anyone to choose her. She was choosing herself. And that was enough.